Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecasts, and strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. Thank you for joining us. Our show today is brought to you by my company, Bull Realty, for commercial real estate asset and occupancy solutions. Visit bullrealty.com, or you can reach out to me directly. My email is an easy one. It's michael@bullrealty.com. Well, on the Commercial Real Estate Show, we're always trying to figure out what's happening next, right? How do we plan? One of the largest users of real estate and of office space around the country is, guess who? The federal government, right? A lot of that's controlled by the GSA. And they have a lot of properties that they own, and then they have some properties also that they lease. And we've all heard about DOGE and the ideas there to try to get some of the federal workers working back in the office so that there's more efficiency with the federal government employees and then also with the space. But also, there's been talk of bureaucracy eliminating some of these groups. So what happens, right? What happens? And are we able to, as a government, save some money, get more productive? Well, let me introduce my guest. It's Andrew Farah. He's co-founder and CEO of Density. Andrew, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, I want to ask you a little bit, share with our audience about Density and what you guys do and how that's going to help us with these discussions today. So you guys have technology that is really helping you understand the utilization of corporate real estate, and in this case, a study on government real estate and the utilization, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. My name's Andrew, and we build radar systems that count people in buildings anonymously. Our sensors get deployed in office buildings all over the world, and we can in real time measure how physical space is used. We've done some work with the federal government, and we've also done some work to put together a report about the scope and scale of the federal portfolio, which is a lot larger than I think a lot of us expected. It's about 1.1 billion square feet of space. And our primary sort of set of questions had to do with, like, if you were to make federal buildings and use of these buildings more efficient, where would you start? Where would you look? Where are the biggest problem areas? And that turned into the Density Federal Buildings Report that we published soon. So anyway, that's my background. We build radar systems that count people.
Okay. And when you first got involved with the federal buildings, when was this, and what were you doing at the time?
Yeah, I think this is 2016, 2017. We were still building systems that counted people inside buildings. Our technology was a little bit different, but we did a handful of different deployments for them. And the impetus was, at the time, the leader of the General Services Administration had a very ambitious objective of consolidating some 40% of the GSA's portfolio, which is about 375 million square feet of space. And he had some really strong opinions on how to do that and how to do it well. But we sort of worked together for a couple of years and watched as there's just a lot of headwinds. Agencies don't like to report utilization because they think they might lose their buildings. And OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, is very difficult to get through any type of consolidations. And then depending on what the political winds are, it's very hard to fund decommissioning of owned buildings. So that's some of our background. We spent a lot of time looking at the problem, a lot of time looking at bills. And just in the last 30 days, 40 days, the federal government actually passed a bill legally requiring agencies to report utilization. And if they don't hit a 60% utilization stat, they lose the building. So it's a very interesting time to be looking at the federal portfolio.
And what are you guys finding when you did your studies prior to COVID, and then as you've studied it more recently, what utilization are you seeing in the government buildings?
Yeah, so I remember at peak utilization. So if obviously folks who listen to this will be very familiar, but you design a building, an office place or an office building for, anywhere from 125 square foot a person to 200 square feet per person, depending on the type of building and the type of company. The building that we were looking at, I remember at peak utilization, so meaning the busiest possible moment, it was something on the order of 1,900 square feet per employee.
Wow. And that
It was a
prior
3-bedroom apartment.
That was prior to COVID?
This is prior to COVID.
Okay.
This is prior to COVID. Now, I want to be really clear. The teams that deployed this, and the General Services Administration in particular, they knew they had this problem, and it was why they were trying to get data so that they could advocate on how they could make better use of the space. So I actually don't blame the folks that are responsible for the portfolio. The problem is that they're deeply underfunded for this type of problem, and there's a lot of headwinds and pushback from the agencies that they support.
Yeah. How much of this federal 1.1 billion square footage is owned by the government? How much is leased roughly?
Yeah, so about 78% is owned. The remainder is leased. So it's 875 million square feet of 1.1 billion is owned, and the remainder is leased.
Yeah. And of the is a part of the problem really the condition of these buildings, especially the owned ones, where they're responsible to maintain them?
Yeah. So these properties, these properties are, some of them are 60, 70 years old, 80 years old. And there are the ones that are, historic and kept up, but then there are an enormous number of buildings that are, they're barely worth the land they're on, but they're filled with stuff, and they're filled with, periodic people. And the federal government just simply can't seem to figure out how to consolidate it, because what you have to do is you actually have to have Congress pass and allocate budget to invest in the decommissioning of these buildings. They're some of them aren't safe. And then you go through the sale process that you would for like any standard building. So, it's a kind of a big moving beast, and leases are actually way more flexible for a bunch of reasons. And I'll give you just like one example. There's 100 million square feet of leases that are expiring in the next 4 years. These leases don't technically expire when the federal government's the customer. When the federal government's the customer, they go into what's called what is the term?
Soft term.
Well, okay, so there's soft term and hard term, but there's also apparently like a holdover period or an extension.
Holdover.
And so the holdover, which maybe you'll know this better than I do, maybe the holdover is the soft term, but the holdover period apparently wreaks havoc on the building owner. But it can last for 6 months, 9 months until they figure out what the contract should be and how much they want to extend it. And an extension is anywhere from like 9 months to a year. So that 100 million square feet of space is not just dying. It's living on even after it expires. And so yeah, lots of problems on both sides of the equation.
Yeah. And I sell government leased buildings, and the ones that we've sold all over the country have been in really good shape. I not remember any of them not being in good shape. So it seems like from the outside looking in, the leased buildings, the federal government doesn't have to capitalize those, right? It's private ownership groups capitalizing those and keeping them in good condition. And those leases are pretty well written for the government on the requirements for these owners to take care of these buildings. So what do you think could happen here as an outcome of DOGE and this issue?
I think that we have an opportunity, and I think the people that have been working with the incoming administration believe that there is an opportunity to fundamentally like revitalize particularly agency headquarters. And the downtown corridor, like the area where I'm from, Washington, D.C., I grew up there, or grew up in Northern Virginia and spent a lot of time in D.C. we have brutalist buildings down there that are poorly used. They're the headquarters of some of our most important agencies, and they are barely touched. I mean, these things are in could be way better than they are. So I think what's going to happen, if I sort of have my crystal ball, is that federal employees are going to be required to return to office in part or in whole. And the telework programs are going to get dialed down. There will be exceptions, but they'll probably get dialed down. I think some core operations will be moved out of DC into state and various states that are sort of better suited to it. And I think that there will be an overall reduction in the number of leases, but ultimately many more leases that are signed, meaning we'll get rid of leases that don't really matter so much. We'll use those dollars to invest in buildings that are much better. We'll see a massive spike in the number of people in the occupancy, the actual simultaneous occupancy of these buildings. And then we're going to, if DOGE is effective and the new GSA leaders are effective, they'll take an axe to the 875 million square feet of space that they want to sell, which means they'll invest a bunch of dollars into these buildings, they'll hire a broker, they'll put it on the market, and you'll see both buy side and sell side.
Well, Andrew, when you look at utilization, you guys are tracking utilization, of a lot of buildings and corporate users. You mentioned that the government now is required to have at least 60% utilization. That seems a little high from a broker selling office buildings around the country. What do you normally see for utilization?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the customer.
Yeah.
And also on their in-office policies. Mm-hmm. But I would say 60 to 70% utilization is a pretty reasonable target. Mm-hmm. Best in class is high 70s, and that's usually on peak days. Wednesdays. Tuesday through Thursday tends to be the busiest times for most of these properties. Which should come as no surprise. Monday, Friday tends to be the least busy. Best in class is 78% use. I was just looking at some of that data recently, and it's not unreasonable to target 60 to 70%. And I should call out that there's two sides to this equation. Everyone thinks it's just about getting more people in, but the reality is we should be reducing the supply of space as well to hit those numbers. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways you can do that is by hibernating a floor or a building, depending on the size and scale of your portfolio. So you don't necessarily have to get rid of the building to create the critical mass that might be necessary for really effective teams. We work with a lot of folks that are thinking about the effectiveness of teams because we work with the private sector. And you can do that by essentially saying, don't let them go to floor 5. Mm-hmm. Only make 1 through 4 available. And when you mess with the denominator, you create the conditions for critical mass in a building. And just like the best metaphor I've ever heard for this is like, when you go to a movie theater and there's only 2 people there, like they don't sit next to each other. Mm-hmm. You don't go find the one dude that's in the movie theater with you and be like, yo, can I sit next to you? Maybe we can share popcorn. Like that's not a thing. Yeah. And it's like humans are like water. We fill the space we're in. Mm-hmm. And so like you'll see they are almost always equidistant from the walls and each other. It's the same thing happens in an office space.
Yeah. And Andrew, explain 70% utilization. What does that really mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So utilization is a bastardized term. It gets used left and right to mean different things. When I say utilization, I don't mean people assigned to the building. That is what a lot of folks talk about. They talk about it as vacancy. So they want to reduce vacancy. It means they want to increase the number of people assigned to a building relative to that building's capacity. And that capacity could be measured as desks, say. We got 1,000 desks. We want to assign 1,200 people. We want to assign 1,000 people. When I say utilization, I mean actual humans in space at the same time or over time relative to the available space to them. So when we say 78% utilization, I mean of the 1,000 people that are assigned to the building, you're getting 78% of them. So you're getting 780.
Okay. The number of people. All right.
Yep.
And that makes sense. So when you guys are doing this study, Andrew, kind of what else jumped out to you here? And then was there anything that may have surprised you?
Oh, yeah. So it turns out if you query this data set, which is a massive data set, it's 111,000 locations. And I can show you the map. Like I can show you. It's called it's called the density Doge tool. But when you look at the buildings that are classified as utilized, unutilized, and not specified, which is just a designation that someone makes. It's not a measurement based on some empirical tool. 44% of those buildings, all 111,000, are classified as utilized. 2.5% are classified as unutilized, and the remainder is not specified.
Not specified.
So agencies, I am certain of this. I call it high confidence, high 90s confidence, are consciously choosing to selectively say utilized and just ignore it when it's not. Because if they say unutilized, it'll fall into a pipeline of consolidation. So I think we're seeing really messy data on purpose.
Interesting. And they're just doing that because they don't want to lose their building. Wouldn't they just be moved somewhere else, maybe newer, nicer?
I mean, presumably, but humans are weird, man. like, it's like the budgeting cycles, like you have to use it or lose it kind of thing. You're not going to keep it for the next year if you don't spend the dollars now. Like we've got, it's very similar when it comes to sort of space allocation. And you have to bear in mind, people get ownership mentality with this stuff. And someone I remember said, if FBI asks for a dozen eggs, but only is going to use 6, I got to go get them a dozen eggs, knowing they're going to break 6. They don't care about it. Yeah. And so that's changing. I mean, and that is going to change it's a lot of promises right now, so who knows? But if they pull off what they're trying to do in federal buildings, we are talking about an inversion of that dynamic, where the agencies are now required to work for the federal budget and work against the federal budget instead of dictating sort of unnecessary spend. And I think that's extremely exciting for a lot of reasons. Those dollars could go to better use.
Yeah, and it's our dollars, right?
Yeah,
public. Yeah, we're giving them the money. Final thoughts, Andrew, about this report and what might happen or advice?
I'm biased to want to measure these buildings, but I say this even if I didn't work in sensing. I think it is crazy that we have 1 billion square feet of space and we don't know how it's used. Like, I just don't know. I don't think there's a future where humans keep building and using buildings and don't measure how they're used. It's one of the most valuable asset classes in the world whose performance we have no idea about. And so I am, whether it's us or somebody else, I honestly, totally separate from our own independent interests, we should know how the world's buildings are used. And if you can make it, if you can install and deploy in a day, and you can do it at really low cost, and you can get really great data about these buildings, I don't know why you wouldn't. Yeah. So that'd be my only perspective on sort of the data side of building use. Yeah,
well, I agree with that. And somebody was asking me about that deficit problem, and I said, you know how much property, land, buildings, everything the government uses or owns? I could take care of the deficit. Just let me loose. I can go
right. Exactly.
I can sell all the buildings, and I have experience selling government used buildings for sure. And we sell a lot of land. Let me loose. I could sell it. I could sell everything that we don't use. let's just pay off the deficit. Andrew, thanks for joining us. Great information. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
And Andrew, you have my favorite quote of the last 14 years. It's a perfect one. Humans are weird. Thank you for that one.
You're welcome.
All right, take care. And hey, and thank you for joining us around the country. And if you'd like to know more, reach out to Andrew, reach out to me. My email is an easy one, michael@bullrealty.com. Until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Bull Realty, commercial real estate sales, leasing, and advisory services. Visit bullrealty.com or reach out to me directly. My email is michael@bullrealty.com. By ShareFile, designed with real estate and other highly regulated industries in mind, ShareFile offers secure digital solution to simplify workflow and improve collaboration. Visit sharefile.com. By Commercial Agent Success Strategies, 21 cloud-accessed agent training videos. Learn more at commercialagentsuccess.com. You're invited to subscribe to the show wherever you listen or watch the show. You're also invited to subscribe to a weekly email announcing the show topic and guests at creshow.com. Thank you for watching, listening, and sharing America's Commercial Real Estate Show.